Hello, once again, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Economancer. Today, we're going to be going into the second chapter of Corruptible by Brian Klaas, and we're going to break this down into two videos. So this video is going to be on the first half of the chapter of chimps and children, and so what this chapter is really trying to express or explain, most basically, is why do hierarchies exist? And so I do have a few issues with this chapter, which is why it's being broken down into two pieces, because there's a lot to really explain. And so the first part is, the first claim really presented is that we are closely related to chimps, which is true. We're also closely related to bonobos, which is something we'll get into through this. So the first part of it goes into the work of Frans de Waal, right? If anybody's ever watched Jordan Peterson, they've probably heard that before. Frans de Waal is a famous primatologist, most notably famous for his work in the politics of chimpanzees, which basically promotes the idea that chimpanzees have a political structure. And we know this because you have chimpanzees that are by nature innately attracted to power divisions, right? So if you have some weakness, they will try to exploit that, and then vice versa. If they think that you're the more powerful in all aspects, they won't really try, but they'll always test those limits with you, right? I mean, then the next thing to notice is that a lot of this work goes into the structure of the political power vested in chimpanzees, right? So the first and most notable is that you can have the alpha male, right? The one that's the strongest, biggest, and the meanest. That doesn't mean that that's the one that's going to have the power. And so before I go in real depth with this, I kind of want to explain something here. Like, what is power? Because I think this gets left out of the conversation because there hasn't really been a deep expression of what power is. And so what I typically think of power, it comes from Luhmann and his theory of power. So power is a functional, symbolic, generalized medium of exchange. All right, so it's got to get unpacked. Symbolic means that it's a symbol of something, right? Okay, fine. Generalized, which means it can be generalized to different hierarchies, means it can be generalized to different systems. And then medium of exchange, which means like money is a medium of exchange. I give you money, you give me good, right? So power is a functional, which means it has a function that works within society or gets society to work. Symbolic, as in it doesn't have to be real, but that it's symbolically real. Generalized, which means it can go across multiple dimensions. And medium of exchange is what we exchange for one another, right? So this means that it can be derived from our evolutionary foundations, such as chimps' behavior. And second, Luhmann points out, is that power depends on the ability to enact negative consequence. So you don't have power unless you can make something bad for someone else. That seems rather easy to understand if you think it this way. So just because an individual can act out in the world doesn't mean that they're actually powerful, because they have to be able to enact something on others to be considered powerful. All right. So back to the argument that's kind of brought up here. All right. So the next is, all right, so we have these chimpanzees and they have these very hierarchical relationships, right? But it's not directly based on brawn, because the head chimp has to reciprocate feelings with the other chimps. Because if the other male chimps feel left out or feel mistreated, they will gang up and beat that one to death. And this has been shown on numerous occasions to happen. So what then becomes this idea? Well, this is the wedge between human hierarchies that are, hierarchical, or human societies that are hierarchical in structure, and then chimp societies that are hierarchical in structure. But humans diverge from chimps, right? And this is where we get into some of the conversations about bonobos, which, again, doesn't really get mentioned in this. And the reason why is because bonobos are considered very egalitarian, very equalitarian, whereas chimps are considered very hierarchical. And then humans are the closest relatives of both of these, are considered somewhere in the middle. And that's why we have multi-level selection. So the next argument that kind of gets this wedge between, without talking about the bonobos, he gets from Tomasello, who's a Duke University developmental psychologist who's worked a lot in linguistics. He's really the counter to Noam Chomsky's work in linguistics, which is, both of them are well beyond me in this domain. But what Tomasello is a proponent of is evolutionary theory, or two-stage evolutionary theory, which is similar to one of the later writers that is brought up by this person. So what's going on here? He makes the argument that Tomasello had an experiment that looked at inequality aversion in toddlers. And if anybody's read any of my or seen any of my work previously on inequality aversion, risk, disgust, and things of these natures, we know that there is some biological or genetic component, but it manifests through environmental propagation. So it's not as easy to say that any of these things is strictly genetic or strictly evolved. It evolves within society or within cultures, even small groups, and manifests itself outwardly based on the environmental pressures that they have, especially when we're talking about multi-level selection. So what's kind of the idea here? Well, essentially he says that Tomasello's work shows that children have a natural predisposition against hierarchies, that they want flatness, and that they have to learn after the fact to be more egalitarian. Now, here's the problem. That's partially right and partially wrong. Tomasello actually did a lot of work in this, and one of the papers, which is the one that he's kind of going at, which, by the way, if you read this book, he doesn't cite any of the literature. He just kind of names them and expresses something that they'd said along the way. So it's really hard to know where, when, and why, or what paper this person says. Is he taking it out of context? Does this person change their mind later on, given different levels of research? None of that's done. So there's acknowledgments, and there is a notes, but it's not expressed directly. And I don't feel like chasing citations that much in this paper, because you should probably make it a little bit more clear in modern society, right? So anyway, so the idea here is that there is an instinct towards fairness, particularly after cooperating. Seemingly random allocations didn't bother the toddlers, but unfair allocations after equal effort clearly unsettled them once they were 3 years old. When we stop tasting our pacifiers, we start to develop a distaste for injustice. Now, again, this is true, but this doesn't mean that children want flat hierarchies. In fact, some of the work that Tomasello done actually kind of goes into why children do have an innateness towards non-flat hierarchies, and this is the work done. So basically, there are different feedback pressures that impact children across this spectrum and across ages. And what he finds is that children do not share equality, and they do not share equally in non-collaboratively produced resources, and that equality norms to allocate resources is only after 5 years. So what does that mean? Well, that means is if two children are working and one child receives the same amount as the other child and the other child didn't work, they actually get very angry about that. They're not okay with that until after the fact, which leads into the idea that they're enculturated into this, or that there's other types of moral foundations being laden into this. Whereas where we would think of something innate, it would be something that's automatic. But that's not the case in this issue. So, yes, children do think that injustice is bad, but they also think that it's an injustice if someone gets something for not working. So, that would give just as much credence to the idea of hierarchies, because if someone does something more, then they're wanting to receive more and they understand that innately. Whereas if everyone is just given something at random and the allocation isn't the same, then they will also be aggravated by that outcome. Not anywhere does that bolster Klaas's argument about flat hierarchies. Now, we get into the next part, and this was how our shoulders shaped society. And really, we didn't even have to go into this, but it basically makes the argument of the evolutionary traits of humans and being able to throw objects. Our eyesight is more for long range distance and movement, which modifies our behavior and our hierarchies, because you don't have to listen to someone just because they're bigger than you and they can beat you up, because you have distance that you can use to win the fight. But notice earlier what I said about chimpanzees. They don't have that level of hierarchy, whereas the strongest is the only one who wins, because even if it's a small society, they will still rise up and beat the other one to death. And that could still be true when it comes to humans. We don't need the next step to be this long-range weapon that flattens the hierarchy. But I do give him credit here because he makes some really, really good arguments. One, he promotes the idea of the Kung. So the Kung have retained their prehistoric way of life from his statement, and that they have these hunting rituals where they exchange arrows and all of this stuff, and whoever gets the kill, they're not going to be able to get full credit for it because they've used other person's arrows or spears or something along those lines. And when they get back, everybody insults that person so that they don't get a big head, and they think, wow, I'm the leader of the tribe because I'm the most successful hunter. And they tell them that they're useless, right? Which is something that that parents commonly do with children to get them to try to motivate to the next level. So it could be, one, a way to flatten the hierarchy. Two, it could be a way to make people try harder. And there's some evidence on both sides of this. And again, there's evidence that parents do this to children or have done this to children for years, which motivates the children to try harder. I think Sal Khan, the guy who runs Khan Academy, has been on TED Talks talking about how he doesn't praise his children whenever they do something really good, because he doesn't want them to think that that's good enough. He wants them to continue down the path of getting better and better and better. And so he says, if you tell your child you're good just the way you are, then they're not going to want to try to strive to work towards more. All right. Now, the next part I like about it is that it does make a biblical reference, right? So again, if you've never read the Bible and you're an atheist, I suggest you read the Bible. Not to find God, which I hope that you do, but I hope that you read it and understand that there are tons of moral lessons developed in the scripture, right? And this one goes into David and Goliath. You can read David and Goliath in Samuel as well as Ephesians and kind of get a good idea of what's going on here. But the way he kind of frames it is that David is kind of this small, normal guy, whereas Goliath is this big, giant man who spent his whole life as a warrior. Now, in the Bible, it actually goes into this, and David goes, well, yeah, he's been a warrior his whole life, but so have I. You think me as just a plain shepherd is not a warrior? He's like, I fought a bear, I fought a lion, I fought all of these animals protecting my flock. That's a warrior, right? And this is, again, something to think about. Warriors aren't just people born directly for war. You can be a warrior in multiple different genres. And in a lot of things that we do can integrate very well into war fighting capabilities and specialities. But he ties this back into the ranged weapon as way to flatten the hierarchy. So here's David, giant sword, here's Goliath, giant sword, coming to chop David with his sling, bang, rock nails him in the head, knocks him down. Because we don't have to actually close the distance and fight, we can maintain a flatter hierarchy, which I give him, credit for making that argument. I don't buy it from the scripture, because the scripture really wants to motivate the reasoning that David isn't just some punk kid off the street. He actually is a warrior. He's a warrior. He's put on the full armor of God, and that is what flattens the hierarchy. not the fact that he has a sling versus a sword, but again, you can read the typology from the Bible in quite an expansive array. But I don't know if this really works, but he does use it to bolster the argument, and it does seem to be valid in that area. So again, the development of these ranged weapons has really flattened hierarchies. Um, now, now we go into this next part about our hunter-gatherer roots, and how this is different. Now, here's the thing about our hunter-gatherer roots. We really don't know a whole lot about our hunter-gatherer roots. So a lot of these arguments are almost purely speculative, whereas they're not objective by any stretch of the imagination. We can infer, and we can think about it, and we can draw conclusions from it through induction, but we're really not able to draw much conclusions deductive. All right. So the next is this idea that since we flatten the hierarchies, we don't need to look at warriors or strong, big, powerful men or anything like that, which in some regards, yes, but in many, no. If you look at any of the old heroes, even modern day heroes, they're still big, gargantuan men and stuff like that. They're still very powerful and strong. Even if they are ranged, they're still considered highly athletic because of, agility, dexterity, things of these nature. That it's not just the hierarchy's flattened because someone can shoot or throw or something like that. So I don't buy that argument. Plus, I don't think it works from an evolutionary standpoint, because we have this thing called the halo effect, right? And the halo effect is pretty serious. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically good-looking people get a lot more breaks and are preferred when it comes to jobs and all other types of social interactions. And one of the primary motivators within the halo effect for men is being big, strong, powerful men. So again, I don't know if this next level motivates the reasoning that he wants it to. So does this ranged weapon flatten the hierarchy, or does it only promote a different type of hierarchy? That's something to think about. Next, he goes into this argument that there was a reversal of hierarchy after we've kind of left the evolutionary track from the bonobos and from the chimpanzees into humans. We started off as highly dominance hierarchy based, and then we went into flattening the hierarchy. And he talks about an individual, Chris Baum, an anthropologist at the University of Southern California, who developed what is known as reverse dominance hierarchy. So you can imagine the dominance hierarchy is a triangle. To reverse it is here. So that's how you keep the thing flat. If someone wants to come up into power, those at the top, because we have this spread, this flat hierarchy, they keep that down. Now, that is, again, partially true, but we're extrapolating from evidence here that we really don't understand. All right. Think about it this way. Was our ancestors more about equality and egalitarianism prior to the agricultural revolution? We don't know. One of the primary resources to say that they was food. And that's because our ancestors had lack of variance in diets, right? So everyone in the tribe had roughly the same diet, but that's one part of a hierarchy that may be different when it comes to peasants and even modern day. But that doesn't mean that's a flat hierarchy, because we don't know what their sexual selection priorities were. We don't know how they manifested other types of hierarchies, such as sleeping arrangements, such as carrying and doing other tasks. We can think of them similar to wolves, where the elders would be in the power and they would hold down the younger, right? That makes sense, but that's still a hierarchy. That's not flat by any stretch of the imagination. It just might manifest itself in a different place because it needs to manifest itself in a different place because it has to react to the environment. But that does not make the argument that it is flat. Okay. Then we go into really this final idea, right? And the fundamental problem with this argument of the evolutionary theory of power that is produced in this first part is that it's not talking about society dealing with anything. It's talking about because A, there was B, and that is the answer. But things are a lot more complex than that. And in fact, complexity, again, is the key here. As society becomes more complex, because it has to deal with more complex environments, then to deal with that complexity, there has to be complexity added on top of it. This is Ashby's law. This is fundamental in cybernetics. And what we can say is that under these conditions in hunter-gatherer, the complexity is fairly low. So you're going to have a less complex hierarchy. When you move to agrarian society, things are more complex because the reality that you exist in is more complex. And I think this gets completely missed, right? And there's a lot to be opened up in Chris Baum's arguments. I know some people are really pro him. I've only read a little bit of his work. I haven't jumped into it as deep as I should have. But I'm also not going to, go read 15 books from another author while I go through this one, because that's just, I just don't have enough time nor care. But the idea here that Chris Baum motivates that I really, really stand against. First of all, he makes a lot of arguments in some of his books, but the issue here is that the evidence for a flat hierarchy is sparse, and it's also heterogeneous, right? We have some societies that we found that are pre-agriculture or hunter-gatherer societies that are very, very diverse in their hierarchies, right? And we have some that are very, very flat. So that doesn't mean that all of them were flat or that they are flat in general. It just means that how that flatness or how the hierarchy manifested itself is essentially based on its environment and its level of complexity at the time. And he acknowledges this, but at the same time, he still wants to make an argument in the absence of the evidence against, which I don't buy that. If there's arguments and evidence in favor of both, and there's no way to really draw the line, the bright line has to be persuasion. And this part of his book, I'm not persuaded by, because I think some of it's taken out of context, and I think some of it leads motivated reasoning or post hoc justification more so than it does to coming to a conclusion based on those evidence or having a theory, which is really the issue here. He has a theoretical and a philosophical presupposition that he's trying to prove. All right. The last thing that Chris Baum brings up, or that he brings up from Chris Baum, is this statement. And this is about the differences between killing in group, right? So about 2% of all deaths in hunter-gatherer societies were caused by homicide. This closely mirrors the rate of primate and primate killings among great apes. Within species killing rate among cheetahs is 8%, 12% for wolves, 15% for sea lions, and up to 17% for seemingly cuddly Madagascar lemurs. But who are the troublemakers in these prehistoric bands of murder-happy humans? I'm sure this is not going to be taken out of context at all. From modern hunter-gatherer societies, we know that the demographic profile of power-hungry upstarts isn't random, which it kind of would be random. The problem personalities were males, Bohm explains. Group leaders, shamans, proficient hunters, homicidal psychotics, or other men with unusual powers or strong tendencies toward political ambiguity. All right. So here's the first problem with that argument. This is extremely sexist of an argument, right? Sexist in two ways. Sexist, one, because it blames men for everything that could go wrong. Second, it doesn't give women any agency. And I know a lot of people like to motivate the argument that women haven't had agency up until the 1900s. I completely disagree with that. And I think it's easily to bear out, right? We have hypergamy. We have other feminine influences on males. I'm sure many of you have seen a corrupt male and a corrupt female, right? So women tend to be highly attracted to people who are psychopathics. Again, this research is out there. So it doesn't seem to me that that is just a male problem. It seems it's a two-part problem. One, males are going to be, chasing some type of attribute and power so they can get women, which is the hypergamous argument. And then the second is women are attracted to men going out and trying to seek this level of power. So that is also going to select for men who act out in this way. That's why psychopathy, based on this, would still be a relevant issue today. It wouldn't have just gotten wiped out throughout years and years and years of our evolutionary history unless there was some motivated need or reasoning for it. And one of those is this hierarchical selection pattern between men and women and the selection pattern that they choose. So you can't just lay this at the feet of men and suppose that that's the end of the argument, because it's not. Women can also motivate men to do corrupt things, just as men can motivate women to be corrupted, so on and so forth, right? Again, this is the fallen nature of humanity, is that we are corrupt. And to blame just men or to blame just women would be anathema. Like you're ridiculous and you're wrong for every part of that argument. So no, I don't blame men for the psychopathy or the other issues in corruption, no more than I blame women. It's a human issue, not a gendered issue. And with that, that is the first part of this. We'll get into the next part, which is war and peas. Which is going to be an interesting piece of information. It's not as dense in notes from me compared to this one, so it'll probably be a shorter video, which this one went 27 minutes. I did not expect it to go that long, but hey, second, I don't have an intro anymore. I got flagged for using the song in the intro, even though I downloaded the song that said, hey, this is a free song. All you got to do is label us into it. So I'm going to be working on putting together another intro that's going to come along with this that I think would be cool. So if you would, please like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you think. If you think some of my arguments are wrong, or you actually think that this is an easily validated argument that Brian Klaas is making, put it down in the comments below and let me know. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon.